For nearly 3 decades, I believed I had the kind of life most people only dream about: a perfect marriage, 2 loving daughters, and a family that seemed unbreakable. Jane and I met when we were young. She was 20, and I was 22. Back then, we were dirt poor, living paycheck to paycheck, but somehow, we made it work. We built our lives from scratch, brick by brick, through every storm life threw at us. Financial struggles, we faced them head-on. Health scares. We held each other's hands in hospital waiting rooms. And yet, no matter how hard things got, we always came out stronger on the other side. Or so I thought. Our 2 daughters, Alice and Maddie, were everything to me. They weren't just my children, they were my pride, my joy, my legacy. Alice, the eldest, was the overachiever, the valedictorian, the golden child who could do no wrong. She was sharp, ambitious, and fiercely loyal, or so I believed. Maddie, the younger one, was the heart of the family, sweet, carefree, and always quick with a smile. She reminded me of Jane when we first met, full of warmth and light. Together, the 4 of us created something beautiful, a home filled with laughter, love, and memories I thought would last forever. Every few weeks, Jane and the girls would have their girls' dinners, as they called them. It was their special time to bond, share secrets, and laugh without me around. At first, I didn't mind. It even made me proud. Seeing how close they were gave me a sense of accomplishment, like I'd done something right as a husband and father. Those moments felt sacred and touchable. How could I have known they were hiding something so dark beneath the surface? One particular memory stands out now, haunting me like a ghost. It was during our anniversary party a few years ago. Friends and family gathered at our house, filling the air with laughter and champagne glasses clinking. Jane stood up to make a toast, her eyes glistening as she looked at me. "He's the best man I've ever known," she said, her voice steady and sincere. The room erupted in applause, and I remember feeling an overwhelming surge of pride. In that moment, I truly believed we were invincible. I thought we were the kind of couple who would grow old together, sitting on the porch, reminiscing about the crazy days of our youth. But now, looking back, those words feel like a cruel joke. A lie wrapped in pretty packaging. Did she mean them at the time? Or was she already planning her escape? Was she laughing behind my back while pretending to love me in front of everyone else? These questions gnaw at me, eating away at what little peace I have left. Because here's the thing: perfection is a fragile illusion. One crack, and the whole facade crumbles into dust. And that's exactly what happened to me. What made it worse was the betrayal wasn't just from Jane, it came from all sides. My own daughters, the ones I raised to be honest and kind, turned against me too. For months, maybe even years, they lied to my face, covering for their mother while she carried on with someone else. Every smile, every hug, every "I love you" felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. How could I not see it? How could I be so blind? Now, I realize the signs were there. I just chose to ignore them because I wanted to believe in the fairy tale we had created. But fairy tales aren't real, and neither was my perfect family. It was supposed to be just another ordinary evening, the kind that blended seamlessly into the tapestry of our lives. Jane had told me she was going out for dinner with Alice and Maddie, another one of their girls' dinners, as they called them. I didn't think twice about it. These nights were a regular part of our family routine, something I'd always taken pride in. It made me feel like we were close-knit, like I'd done something right as a husband and father. But that night, everything changed. Jane was upstairs getting ready while I sat in the kitchen nursing a cup of coffee, scrolling absent-mindedly through my phone. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a sound I'd heard countless times before but never paid much attention to. This time, though, something compelled me to pick it up. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was some subconscious warning bell ringing deep within me. Whatever it was, I opened the message without thinking. The words hit me like a freight train. "Can't wait to see you tonight." My stomach dropped, and my heart began pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Confusion clouded my mind at first. Who could this be? Was it a mistake, a wrong number, But deep down, I already knew the truth. It wasn't. The tone was too intimate, eager. And then, against every fiber of decency screaming inside me, I tapped on the thread to read more. What I found shattered my world into a million irreparable pieces. The messages weren't long, but they didn't need to be. They spoke volumes. Flirty exchanges between Jane and her boss, filled with longing and affection. "I miss you," one message read. "Once a week isn't enough." Jane's reply sent chills down my spine. "I miss you too." As I scrolled further, I realized this wasn't a recent development. These texts went back months, nearly a year. A whole year of lies. A whole year of betrayal. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the phone. How could this happen? How could the woman I loved, the mother of my children, do this to me? To us? My mind raced, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. But there was no sense to be made here. There was only pain, raw and unrelenting. I needed answers. I needed proof. So, when Jane finally came downstairs dressed impeccably, smiling warmly at me as if nothing was wrong, I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I activated location sharing on her phone, something I'd never done before. I told myself I had to know for sure, even though deep down, I already did. As I waited for her location to update, I texted Alice and Maddie under the guise of checking in. "What time are you meeting Mom for dinner?" Their responses came almost instantly. Alice replied, 7 o'clock, "Can't wait to see her." Maddie echoed the sentiment. Lies, both of them lying to my face. My own daughters. The realization felt like a second blow, one that left me reeling. Not only was Jane betraying me, but my girls were complicit in her deception. When Jane's location finally updated, my worst fears were confirmed. She wasn't heading to the usual restaurant where they held their dinners. No, she was somewhere far worse, a place that cut deeper than any other, the upscale bistro where we'd celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary. The irony was cruel. That restaurant had been a symbol of our love, a memory etched in gold. Now, it was tainted forever, transformed into the backdrop of her betrayal. I grabbed my car keys and drove there, my heart hammering in my chest the entire way. When I arrived, I parked outside and scanned the windows until I spotted her. There she was, sitting at a table near the back with her boss. They were laughing, holding hands, completely oblivious to the fact that I was watching them from afar. Each smile, each touch, felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my soul. I snapped the picture not because I wanted evidence, but because I needed to prove to myself that this nightmare was real. Driving away, I stared at the photo on my phone, tears blurring my vision. Anger, sadness, disbelief, all of it swirled inside me like a violent storm. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew one thing for certain: my life as I knew it was over. Before I could lose control completely, I opened our family group chat and sent the photo with a single caption: "Glad you're enjoying girls' dinner." Then I turned off my phone and drove to my brother's house. That night, lying awake on his couch, I replayed the scene over and over in my mind. How could she use our memories, the very foundation of our marriage, to hide her infidelity? How could she sit in that same restaurant where we once toasted to our future and laugh with another man? Every detail felt like salt being rubbed into an open wound. My perfect family, my happy marriage, my trust, all of it was a lie. And now, I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer existed. The betrayal didn't stop with Jane, it ran deeper, cutting through the very foundation of my family. As I pieced together the fragments of my shattered life, I realized that Alice and Maddie weren't just innocent bystanders in their mother's affair. They were active participants in her deception. My daughters, the ones I had raised to value honesty, integrity, and loyalty, had conspired to protect her lies. Each revelation felt like another layer of trust being stripped away, leaving me raw and exposed. Alice, my eldest, the one I'd always seen as a beacon of responsibility and strength, was the mastermind behind covering up Jane's tracks. She wasn't just complicit, she actively helped orchestrate the secret meetings between her mother and her boss. It started small: a text here, a phone call there, but over time, it became clear that Alice had taken on the role of her mother's confidant and accomplice. She would intercept my questions about dinner plans, crafting elaborate stories about where Jane was going or what they were doing together. Every lie rolled off her tongue so effortlessly that I never suspected a thing. Maddie, on the other hand, played a different part. At first, she seemed reluctant, even guilty. According to Jane, Maddie had initially begged her to end the affair, pleading with her to think about our family and the damage this would cause. But when Jane refused, Maddie chose silence instead of confrontation. Her decision to stay quiet spoke volumes. It wasn't just cowardice, it was betrayal. By choosing not to tell me the truth, she became an accessory to the destruction of everything we had built. And yet, despite her guilt, she continued to act as if nothing was wrong, smiling at me across the dinner table while hiding the darkest secret of all. The moment that truly broke me came during a heated argument with Alice. After discovering the extent of her involvement, I confronted her, hoping for some semblance of remorse or understanding. Instead, she stared at me with cold indifference, her voice sharp and unyielding. "I think it's normal for Mom to find happiness somewhere else," she said, her tone laced with disdain. "You're too rigid, Dad. You don't understand how hard it is for her." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. Not only was she defending her mother's infidelity, but she was also dismissing my values, my beliefs, and the moral compass I had tried so hard to instill in her. Her statement revealed something far more devastating than I could have imagined. Alice didn't just side with Jane, she despised me. In her eyes, I was the villain, the unreasonable husband who couldn't meet her mother's needs. The irony was suffocating. For years, I had sacrificed everything for my family, working long hours, providing financial stability, and supporting them emotionally. Yet, in Alice's twisted logic, I was the problem. Her casual dismissal of my pain made me realize that she no longer saw me as a father deserving of respect but as an obstacle standing in the way of her mother's happiness. As the days passed, I replayed that conversation in my mind, dissecting every word, every implication. How could Alice, the daughter I had raised to be strong and principled, justify such betrayal? Was it naivety, arrogance, or something darker, a complete disregard for the sanctity of marriage and family? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Her actions weren't just a reflection of poor judgment. They were a direct attack on everything I stood for. Meanwhile, Maddie's role in all of this haunted me in a different way. And like Alice, Maddie wore her guilt like a second skin. She cried endlessly, apologizing profusely and begging for forgiveness. But her tears rang hollow because they came too late. If she had truly cared, she would have spoken up when it mattered most. Instead, she chose self-preservation over truth, allowing the lies to fester until they consumed us all. Her apologies felt like salt on an open wound, reminding me of how easily she had abandoned the principles I had taught her. The realization that both my daughters had turned against me left me reeling. They weren't just protecting their mother, they were ejecting me, erasing decades of love, sacrifice, and guidance. Their betrayal wasn't just personal, it was existential. It forced me to question everything I believed about myself as a father, a husband, and a man. Had I failed them somehow? Was this my punishment for not being enough? These questions gnawed at me, eating away at whatever remained of my sense of self-worth. But amidst the chaos, one thing became painfully clear: I couldn't rebuild what had been broken. Trust, once lost, cannot be regained, not when it's been shattered by those you hold dearest. Alice's coldness and Maddie's guilt were two sides of the same coin, both equally destructive. Together, they formed a wall between us, one I know I could never climb. And so, I made a decision, one that would change the course of my life forever. After the confrontation with Jane, I knew there was no turning back. The woman I had loved for nearly 3 decades, the mother of my children, the person I trusted above all others, had betrayed me in ways I could never have imagined. It wasn't just the affair, it was the lies, the deceit, and the calculated destruction of everything we had built together. But what truly broke me was realizing that she hadn't acted alone. My daughters, Alice and Maddie, were complicit in her betrayal, willingly shielding her sins while stabbing me in the back. Every ounce of trust I once had for them had evaporated, leaving behind a void filled only with anger and despair. The next morning, I woke up with a singular purpose: to take control of my life again. I couldn't let Jane or anyone else dictate how this would end. I started by calling several lawyers, determined to find someone who could help me navigate the legal labyrinth ahead. After hours of consultations, I settled on a sharp, no-nonsense attorney named Sarah. She listened intently as I recounted the story, the texts, the photos, the lies, and assured me she'd seen cases like mine before. "We'll make sure you're protected," she said firmly, though her words offered little comfort. What did comfort me, however, was knowing I finally had someone on my side, a professional who understood the gravity of my situation. During one of our early meetings, Sarah asked about our joint finances. "Do you know if your wife has made any unusual withdrawals recently?" she questioned, her tone cautious but probing. At first, I didn't think much of it. Jane had always handled most of the day-to-day financial matters, so I assumed everything was fine. But when Sarah requested copies of our bank statements, the truth came crashing down on me like an avalanche. There, in black and white, was evidence of Jane's betrayal extending far beyond emotional infidelity. Over the past year, she had quietly siphoned off tens of thousands of dollars from our shared accounts, not for household expenses or emergencies, but to buy extravagant gifts for her boss. Jewelry, luxury watches, even vacations under the guise of business trips. Each transaction felt like another knife twisting deeper into my heart. The discovery left me seething. How dare she use our money, the money I worked tirelessly to earn, to fund her affair? How could she justify spending funds meant for our family on a man who had no place in our lives? The realization fueled a fire inside me, solidifying my resolve to cut her off completely. "I want her to get nothing," I told Sarah, my voice trembling with rage. "Absolutely nothing." Together, we drafted plans to freeze all joint accounts, redirect assets into separate holdings, and ensure Jane wouldn't walk away with a single penny more than she deserved. But my decision didn't stop at Jane. As much as it pained me to admit, Alice and Maddie were equally culpable in this mess. Their betrayal wasn't passive, it was active, deliberate, and devastating. They had lied to my face, covered for their mother, and helped orchestrate a web of deception that shattered my world. For weeks after discovering the truth, I wrestled with whether I could ever forgive them. Could I look at Alice without seeing her cold indifference? Could I trust Maddie after her tears proved hollow? The answer, ultimately, was no. I realized that forgiving them would mean excusing their actions, and I couldn't do that, not when they had chosen to side with Jane over me. With a heavy heart, I instructed Sarah to revise my will. Everything, my savings, retirement fund, the house I had poured my soul into building, would now go to my sister and her family. They had always been there for me, offering unconditional support without judgment or betrayal. And like my own flesh and blood, they deserved my trust and loyalty. When I told my brother about the decision, he didn't try to dissuade me. Instead, he nodded solemnly. "You're doing the right thing," he said. They made their choices. Now they can live with the consequences. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel a strange sense of liberation. Cutting ties with Jane, Alice, and Maddie wasn't easy. It felt like severing parts of myself, but it was necessary. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of their betrayal crushing me. I focused on rebuilding my life, piece by piece, determined to move forward without looking back. And though the pain lingered, I held on to one undeniable truth: they had made their choices, and now I was making mine. The confrontations with Maddie and Alice were two of the most emotionally charged moments in my life, each leaving a scar that would take years to heal if it ever did. After deciding to remove them from my will, I knew they wouldn't take it lightly. But nothing could have prepared me for the raw intensity of their reactions. Maddie was the first to break down. She called me late one night, her voice trembling as she pleaded through sobs, "Dad, please don't do this. I know I messed up, but I love you so much. Please don't cut me out of your life." Her desperation was palpable, almost suffocating. The guilt clawed at me, threatening to unravel the resolve I had painstakingly built over weeks. Yet, Even as her cries echoed in my ears, I reminded myself of the lies she had told, the way she had chosen silence over honesty when it mattered most. When we finally met face to face, her fragile state shocked me. She arrived at the park where I'd asked to see her, looking like a shadow of herself, eyes swollen, hair unkempt, hands shaking uncontrollably. As soon as she sat down on the bench beside me, she burst into tears again. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered between gasps for air. "I thought Mom would stop. I thought everything would go back to normal." Her words felt hollow, an attempt to justify her betrayal rather than acknowledge its weight. When I pressed her about why she hadn't come forward earlier, she faltered, unable to provide a coherent answer. But what truly broke me was what happened next. As I explained my decision to remove her from my will, her body went limp. Before I could react, she collapsed onto the ground, unconscious. Panic surged through me as I knelt beside her, shaking her gently, calling her name. For a moment, I feared the worst, that my actions had pushed her too far. Thankfully, she regained consciousness after a few minutes, but the image of her fainting lingered in my mind long after our meeting ended. It haunted me, gnawing at the edges of my conscience. Still, despite the guilt, I refused to budge. Forgiveness wasn't possible, not yet, maybe not ever. Alice, however, took a completely different approach. Rather than confronting me directly, she sent a scathing email accusing me of being vindictive and irrational. "You're punishing us for something that isn't our fault," she wrote, her tone dripping with indignation. "How can you ruin my wedding over this?" Her words stung, not because they held any truth, but because they revealed how deeply entrenched she was in her mother's narrative. To her, I was the villain, a selfish tyrant incapable of understanding or compassion. Our eventual face-to-face confrontation was explosive. When I asked her why she had lied to me, she responded with cold defiance. "I didn't want to get involved," she said, leaning back in her chair as if dismissing the gravity of the situation. "It was between you and Mom," my patience snapped. "Didn't want to get involved," I repeated, my voice rising. "You didn't stay out of it, Alice. You lied to me. You covered for her." "That's not staying out of it, that's choosing a side." Her response hit me like a punch to the gut. "Fine," she shot back, her eyes blazing. "If you want to act like this is some unforgivable crime, then fine. But let's not pretend you're innocent here. Mom has put up with you for years, your rigidness, your inability to meet her needs, and now you won't even give her a second chance. You're just a selfish man who doesn't care about anyone but himself." Her words reverberated in the room, sharp and cutting. They weren't just accusations. They were declarations of war. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The audacity of her statement left me speechless. Here she was, defending her mother's infidelity while simultaneously tearing me apart. In her eyes, I wasn't a father betrayed, I was an obstacle standing in the way of her idealized version of family harmony. Her refusal to acknowledge the depth of the betrayal made it clear that she had chosen sides long before this conversation. And worse, she had no intention of looking back. As the argument escalated, Alice resorted to threats. "If you don't pay for the wedding, I'll sue you," she hissed, her voice laced with venom. "You owe me that much after all these years." Her words struck me not because of their legal implications, but because of what they revealed about her character. She viewed our relationship transactionally, reducing decades of love and sacrifice to a mere financial obligation. It was a final blow, confirming everything I had suspected. Alice was no longer my daughter in spirit. She was Jane's ally, willing to destroy whatever remained of our bond to protect her mother. By the end of the day, I felt drained, emotionally and physically. Both conversations had left me reeling, questioning whether I had done the right thing. Maddie's fainting spell replayed in my mind, a constant reminder of the cost of my decisions. Alice's harsh words echoed in my ears, fueling both my anger and my sorrow. Yet, amidst the chaos, one thing became painfully clear: forgiveness wasn't an option, not when it meant excusing betrayal. They had made their choices, and now I was making mine. The fallout from my decisions rippled through the lives of Alice and Maddie like a tsunami, leaving devastation in its wake. For Alice, the consequences were immediate and tangible. Her dream wedding, once a glittering spectacle on the horizon, began to crumble piece by piece. Without my financial support, she was forced to cancel or downgrade nearly every luxury service she had planned. The extravagant venue gone, the designer dress replaced with something far less glamorous. Even the gourmet catering was swapped for a modest buffet. Each cancellation felt like another nail in the coffin of her carefully curated fantasy. But it wasn't just the logistics that unraveled. Her relationship with her fiancé started to fray as well. He grew increasingly frustrated, lashing out at her for what he perceived as poor planning. "How could you let this happen?" he snapped during one heated argument. "You said your dad would take care of everything." His words cut deep, not because they were untrue but because they highlighted the fragility of their partnership. Alice, who had always prided herself on being in control, now found herself drowning in chaos. She tried reaching out to me multiple times, sending desperate emails and texts begging for reconsideration, but I remained silent. Every plea fell into the void, unanswered and ignored. Maddie's descent, however, was far more harrowing. While Alice grappled with logistical nightmares, Maddie spiraled into a pit of despair so profound that it consumed her entirely. Her once bright personality dimmed, replaced by a shadow of her former self. She stopped answering calls from friends, withdrew from social activities, and eventually took a leave of absence from work, claiming she couldn't focus. It wasn't hard to see why her guilt weighed heavily on her, manifesting in sleepless nights, panic attacks, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Despite her attempts to reach me, calling repeatedly and leaving tearful voicemails, I refused to engage. I told myself it was necessary, that giving in would only undermine the boundaries I had set, but each unanswered call left me feeling hollow inside. One day, unable to bear the silence any longer, Maddie showed up unannounced at my doorstep. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. Her hair wasn't kempt, her eyes bloodshot, and her face gone to stark contrast to the vibrant young woman I used to know. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, and clung to my legs as if afraid I might vanish. "Dad, please," she begged, her voice hoarse and broken. "I can't live without you. I'll die without you." Her words struck me like a hammer blow, reopening wounds I thought had begun to heal. For a moment, I considered pulling her into my arms, offering comfort and reassurance. But then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the shattered trust, and my resolve hardened. "This is the consequence of your actions," I said coldly, stepping back to create distance between us. "You chose to betray me, Maddie. Now you have to live with the consequences." My voice didn't waver, but my heart did. Watching her break down in front of me was excruciating, yet I knew relenting would only prolong the pain for both of us. She screamed, pleaded, and even threatened to harm herself, but I stood firm. By the time she finally staggered away, exhausted and defeated, I felt as though I had aged 10 years. That night, I sat alone in my study, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. Maddie's cries echoed in my ears, haunting me like a ghost. Was I doing the right thing? Could I have handled it differently? These questions gnawed at me, eating away at whatever peace I had managed to find. Yet, despite the guilt and doubt, I reminded myself of one undeniable truth: forgiveness without accountability was meaningless. They had made their choices, and now they had to face the repercussions just as I had faced mine. Alice's struggles continued to unfold in parallel, though hers were marked by anger rather than despair. Mutual acquaintances reported that she had become bitter and resentful, blaming me for ruining her life. At first, I dismissed her complaints as childish tantrums, but when I heard about how strained her engagement had become, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Had I gone too far, or was this simply the natural result of their own actions catching up with them? As the weeks passed, the weight of my decisions settled heavily upon me. Cutting ties with my daughters hadn't brought the closure I had hoped for, it had only deepened the chasm between us. Yet, amidst the turmoil, I clung to the belief that I had done what was necessary to protect myself. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a gift I could give, not until they proved they deserved it. It had been exactly 1 month since I made the decision to cut Alice and Maddie out of my will, a move that felt like severing a vital part of myself. The pain was still there, lingering in the corners of my mind, but it no longer consumed me. Instead, I found a strange sense of relief, a quiet acknowledgement that I had done what needed to be done. Every day without them was a step toward reclaiming my life, even if it meant living with the void they left behind. Alice, predictably, refused to let go quietly. One afternoon, as I sat alone in the house that once echoed with laughter and warmth, a letter arrived in the mail. It was handwritten, something rare these days, and her familiar scrawl filled the page. The envelope trembled slightly in my hands as I opened it, but before I could read more than a few lines, something inside me snapped. Her words blurred together, each sentence dripping with guilt and desperation. "Dad, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I can't imagine my life without you." But I couldn't bring myself to finish. Instead, I walked outside to the backyard where my sister stood tending to her garden. Without hesitation, I lit a match and held the letter over the flame. As the edges curled and blackened, I watched the ink smudge into ash, carrying with it the remnants of Alice's pleas. My voice was steady but cold as I spoke aloud. "I don't want to see anything related to them anymore, not their letters, not their apologies, nothing." My sister didn't respond. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She knew better than anyone how deeply this betrayal had scarred me. That evening, I returned to the house, now eerily silent. The emptiness pressed down on me like a weight, amplifying every creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind through the windows. I wandered from room to room, memories assaulting me at every turn. In the kitchen, I could almost hear Jane humming while preparing dinner. In the living room, I imagined Alice sprawled on the couch scrolling through her phone, and Maddie giggling as she recounted some trivial story. These fragments of the past were sharp and vivid, cutting deeper than any knife ever could. Finally, I ended up in the hallway, staring at the wall where family photos once hung proudly. After my confrontation with Jane, I had torn them all down in a fit of rage, leaving only faint outlines of frames and scattered shards of glass. Among the debris lay an old photograph I hadn't noticed before, a picture of us at Alice's high school graduation. We looked happy then, smiling brightly for the camera as though nothing could touch us. Now, it felt like a cruel mockery of everything I thought we were. I picked up the photo, holding it gingerly between my fingers. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember the pride I felt watching Alice walk across the stage, the way Maddie clung to my arm, Jane's hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Back then, I believed we were invincible, that our bond was unbreakable. How naive I had been. A bitter laugh escaped my lips as I muttered under my breath, "The perfect family. What a joke." With deliberate force, I hurled the photo against the wall. The glass shattered into tiny pieces, scattering across the floor like glittering tears. For a fleeting second, I felt a surge of satisfaction, as though destroying the image might somehow erase the pain it represented. But the relief was short-lived. The truth remained. Those moments, those smiles, those promises, they were all lies. Our so-called perfection was nothing but a facade, carefully constructed to hide the cracks beneath. Sinking onto the couch, I buried my face in my hands, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Was I doing the right thing? Could I have handled it differently? These questions haunted me, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. Yet, despite the doubt and guilt, I reminded myself of one undeniable fact: forgiveness without accountability was meaningless. They had made their choices, and now I was making mine. As night fell, I sat alone in the darkness, surrounded by the ghosts of my former life. The house, once alive with joy and laughter, now felt like a tomb, a monument to everything I had lost. And yet, amidst the sorrow, there was a glimmer of hope. For the first time in months, I felt free. Free from the lies, free from the betrayal, free from the toxic ties that had bound me for so long. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. Because in the end, I realized something profound: sometimes, letting go is the only way to truly move forward. The betrayal that shattered my life didn't come from a single source. It came from every corner of the family I had built. Jane, Alice, and Maddie weren't just individual actors in this tragedy. They were complicit participants in a web of deceit so intricate and devastating that it left me questioning everything I once believed about love, trust, and loyalty. This wasn't just an affair, it was a systematic dismantling of the foundation I thought we had constructed together. The emotional toll was unbearable, but what made it worse was realizing that the people I trusted most had turned against me. When I discovered Jane's infidelity, I expected anger, heartbreak, and confusion, but I never anticipated the depth of betrayal that would follow. My daughters, whom I raised to value honesty and integrity, chose silence over truth. They stood by as their mother destroyed our marriage, covering her tracks while lying directly to my face. Every smile, every hug, every "I love you" felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. How could I ever look at them again without seeing the lies behind their eyes? Their actions weren't just mistakes, they were choices, deliberate decisions to prioritize their mother's happiness over my dignity. Cutting ties with them wasn't something I did lightly. It was a decision born out of necessity, not vengeance. Emotionally, I needed space to heal, to shield myself from further harm. Financially, I couldn't risk being taken advantage of by people who clearly didn't respect me. Removing Alice and Maddie from my will wasn't about punishing them, it was about protecting myself. For years, I had poured everything I had into building a future for them, a future I now realized they didn't deserve. The house, the savings, the retirement fund, all of it represented sacrifices I made for a family that no longer existed. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Maddie begged for forgiveness, her tears streaming down her face as she pleaded for another chance. But forgiveness without accountability is meaningless. She had betrayed me, and until she truly understood the gravity of her actions, reconciliation was impossible. Alice, on the other hand, doubled down on her defiance, accusing me of being selfish and unreasonable. Her refusal to acknowledge the severity of her betrayal only reinforced my belief that cutting them off was the right decision. In the weeks that followed, I began to feel a strange sense of liberation. The weight of their deception no longer pressed down on me. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling suffocated by their lies. Yet, this newfound freedom came at a cost. The house that once echoed with laughter and warmth now stood eerily silent. The photos on the walls, once symbols of our happy memories, had been torn down in a fit of rage. Even the air seemed heavier, carrying the ghosts of a life I could never reclaim. Loneliness became my constant companion, a reminder of the family I had lost. But amidst the emptiness, there was clarity. I realized that staying in toxic relationships, whether romantic or familial, only perpetuates pain. By cutting ties, I reclaimed control over my life. I learned that forgiveness isn't always possible, especially when those who wronged you refuse to take responsibility for their actions. And perhaps most importantly, I understood that self-preservation must come before blind loyalty. Protecting yourself doesn't make you selfish, it makes you human. To anyone reading this story, let it serve as a cautionary tale. Trust is fragile, and once broken, it's nearly impossible to repair. If someone betrays you, don't ignore the red flags in hopes that things will magically improve. Confront the issue head-on, and if reconciliation isn't possible, have the courage to walk away. Staying in a toxic environment won't fix anything, it will only prolong your suffering. Surround yourself with people who genuinely care about you, and don't be afraid to set boundaries. Sometimes, letting go is the hardest but most necessary step toward healing. As for me, I've accepted that my journey forward will be solitary. The road ahead may be lonely, but it's also filled with possibilities. I'm no longer tethered to the expectations or manipulations of others. For the first time in decades, I'm free to live for myself. While the scars of betrayal will always remain, they remind me of how far I've come and how much stronger I've become. Family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by mutual respect and love. And though mine fell apart, I know I can rebuild something better, something real.